The 1920s was a time of prosperity, but also a time of many downfalls. It was known as an era of change, with everything from radios to automobiles to flappers to prohibition and even monkey trials. The 1920s was a very upbeat time in our nation's history. The behavior of women changed a lot in the 1920s. It was in style to wear clothing that was much shorter and more revealing. Outfits were used even for advertising. At this time, women started smoking, which in the 20s was considered bizarre and scandalous. Men were the ones that smoked. Among other things, women's suffrage was a hot topic in the 20s. Behavior and style of women in the 20s still affect us today in the 21st century. Being an era of change, a lot of new technology was invented in the 20s. One of the inventions from the 1920s was the telephone. Needless to say, telephones from the 1920s weren't as high-tech and advanced as the smartphones we now have today. Along with the telephone came the television. Again, these are nothing like the high-def plasma TVs we have today. Everybody in the 20s had radios. And traffic lights were just invented, so they were popping up everywhere. And Band-Aids were the hip new thing. Inventions such as penicillin, automobiles, and hair dryers are still used to this day. There were a lot of really important political and social events that took place during the 20s. One important event from the 1920s is the organization of the Ku Klux Klan. The Ku Klux Klan is an extremist organization. They support white nationalism, anti-immigration, and white supremacy. They are historically known for expressing these beliefs through terrorism. Another very important, well-known event is the John Scopes trial, also known as the Monkey Trial. The John Scopes trial was an American legal case in 1925 in which a high school biology teacher, John Scopes, was accused of violating the state's Butler Act. This act made it unlawful to teach evolution. Scopes was found guilty, but the verdict was overturned on a technicality, and he was never brought back to trial. The trial drew intense national publicity as national reporters flocked to the small town of Dayton. Two of the biggest names of the 20s were at the trial, representing each side: William Jennings Bryan and Clarence Darrow. Because of the outcome of this trial, we learn evolution today in our schools. One final major event that happened at the end of the 1920s was the stock market crash of 1929. This crash devastated our country and sent us into a Great Depression. Thousands of people lost millions of dollars, and it greatly affected our country. These past events helped shape our nation as it is now. We may not think about it too much, but the 1920s really formed our country as it is today, in more ways than one. Politically, technologically, and socially too. Without the great progression made in the 1920s, our country would not be the same great nation it is today.